She has had 3 nonfiction books published, including a history book for Los Angeles County and a travel guidebook for Globe Pequot Press. Her first novel, In the Shadow of War, Spies, Love, and the Lusitania, which is set during World War I, was published last year. The book she's going to talk about tonight is Stories in Stone, Miners and Madams, Merchants and Murderers. Contains 100 true stories of pioneers who lived and died in Park City, Utah. Her extensive research about the most interesting deceased residents of the old mining town led her to interviews with still living people. Many shared stories about the abundant number of ghostly apparitions that haunt the old buildings. She's happy to share some of her eerie experiences with us tonight.
Awesome.
Our next panelist is Xina Marie Uhl. She was born and raised in Arizona. A fan of history from her grade school days, she obtained a master's degree in history with a focus on the ancient Mediterranean. She went on to become a novelist and writer of more than 30 nonfiction books for young people. Her fiction spans genres including fantasy, adventure, and romance, and locations such as the Roman Empire, Antarctica, and the American West. Her novel Necropolis is a fantasy greatly influenced by ancient history, and her current work in progress, Blue Moon Rising, weaves the tale of Navajo skinwalkers and centuries-old trauma into a modern-day fantasy. I think we're going to hear more about the skinwalkers in a little bit.
Oh, yes.
Los Angeles native Jeri Westerson is the author of 14 Crispin Guest medieval noir mystery novels, a series nominated for 13 national awards from the Agatha to the Seamus. Well done, Jeri. That's impressive. Yes. She also writes 3 paranormal series, Book of the Hidden, an urban fantasy set in a small town in Maine with demons and angry gods. The Enchanter Chronicles trilogy is a gas lamp or steampunk series with a magician, demons, and a beautiful and mysterious Scotland Yard special inspector. The second in the series, Clockwork Gypsy, releases later this month. And Jeri will be talking about that tonight. Also writes a werewolf mystery series beginning with Moonrisers set in Huntington Beach, California, with a serpent wolf solving crimes with the help of a voodoo coven. That sounds pretty interesting too. Under the pen name Haley Walsh, she writes the Skylar Fox Mysteries, a humorous and romantic LGBT mystery series set in Redlands. Jeri has served 2 terms as president of the Southern California chapter of Mystery Writers of America, twice president of the Orange County chapter of Sisters in Crime, and 1 term as vice president for the Los Angeles chapter of Sisters in Crime. She's also a member of Science Fiction and Fantasy Writers of America and the Historical Novels Society. And I don't know when she sleeps. So my first question for all 3 panelists is to go ahead and tell us what your book is about and what inspired you to write it. Okay, who wants to go first? Xina?
Okay. Well, my novel or my story, Blue Moon Rising, is a fantasy novel in 6 parts, and it's a work in progress. I'm about 5/6 of the way through. It's not going quite as fast as I would like, but that happens sometimes. And it includes 2 eras. One is present day. That is a veterinarian saves the life of a coyote shapeshifter. And then the other era it takes place in is the 1860s. And this is when the Navajo people in northern Arizona and around the Four Corners area, they were forced from their land they had to walk similar to the Trail of Tears. They had to walk from northern Arizona all the way to eastern New Mexico with a terrible loss of life and very traumatic. So this being a fantasy, also that's how the evil nemesis, the skinwalker, came about. So it was inspired by, I was born and raised in Arizona, and even despite that, I did not know about the Long Walk until a few years ago when I read a great blog post about it from the archivist of the government or something. They were bringing the treaty that ended that to the Navajo people and exhibiting it, and it was just so interesting. I just had to write about it.
That's great. And Jeri?
Well, Clockwork Gypsy, my gas lamp / steampunk book, is about there's a railway in London, that brand new railway that is said to go to London, from London to Edinburgh in 2 hours,
Wow.
but which you still can't do. But there's obviously something magical and mysterious about it, and it seems to be killing supernatural immortal creatures. And that brings out the Special Inspector Mingli Zhao, who from Scotland Yard, who investigates paranormal activities in London and paranormal crimes. And she asks the help of Leopold Casimir, the great enchanter, the magician, who peppers his stage act with real magic that he gets by summoning Jewish demons. So gets very complicated. Of course, there is a clockwork gypsy. There's a clockwork Romani man who is out to get the man who made him into this clockwork, and he's slowly turning completely into metal and pistons and gears. And the whole idea of that, this is the second in the series, but the whole idea of that, of following the magician and his help in investigating these supernatural crimes, is I just love this time period in the late 19th century of England, and the whole idea that magicians were thought of as really being able to do magic. And a side note to that was sort of looking at Jewish mysticism and how fascinating that was, and how that could just sort of really glom into this story of a magician who really can do magic by summoning Jewish demons and all the mysticism and Gehenna and all the terror of other demons to go along with it. So it's a lot of fun. It's a lot of humor and a lot of excitement, some pathos, all the good stuff.
And in your books you have, I read The Demon Device, and in that title it's spelled D-A-E-M-O-N. You
Yeah.
have demons with just the E. And what is the difference? Can you tell us a bit about why you used?
They're pronounced the same, but D-A-E, demon, is more of a helpful spirit. And this goes more with the Jewish idea of demons not being, well, let's face it, New Testament kinds of demons that are poking at you with a pitchfork and sending you to hell. These guys do a little more helpful things, which is also stems from the Greek idea of demons. So D-E demons are the bad guys. So there are two kinds, which makes it tough for the audiobook. But you get the idea.
I see. Okay. And Colleen, what about Stories in Stone?
Well, I had been going up to Park City, Utah since I was a little girl, and being interested in history all this time, I would always, wherever I would go through the pioneer cemeteries. And then it's been years now ago that I decided I wanted to know more about the actual people. And this is a nonfiction book, but so what I'm going to talk about tonight mainly, rather than this book, because it's pretty self-explanatory in that, it's about the people who lived and died there. And I had to whittle it down to 100. And that took a lot of time. And at the time I was going to go on and write a legends and ghost stories of old Park City, and ran into some complications with people threatening to sue me if I revealed that they're well, one of them was made into a children's school, and it had been a big home, and they didn't like the idea of using that story of a murder that happened there when they had little children going to school. Okay. So I can talk a little bit about how I put the book together and some kind of eerie experiences that happened in the cemetery when I was in there tromping around. So should I save the stories for later?
What do you think?
Well, what happened was,
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
okay. It had been one of them. There's two old cemeteries there. One of them, Glenwood, was what you imagine would be a typical haunted cemetery with the gate and the whole thing. And no one had kept it up in decades and decades. So it was overgrown, and a lot of the headstones, those beautiful headstones with angels and, like they used to do them, and scrolls and everything, they were broken or fallen down. So I had a dickens of a time finding, I was trying to map it out and everything, and there were no records to refer to. So I was there one time by myself, and I couldn't find this one guy. His last name was Paradise. It was Louis Paradise. And he had been involved in a murder-suicide. And so I was looking for him, and I kind of think he was kind of a bad guy. And so I thought, well, maybe they just buried him without, a cross or without anything. And I was tromping around. I kept saying, Louis, Louis. And then I kept hearing some noise. And we have all the aspen trees around that are making that fluttering sound. And, so I heard this odd kind of a groaning sound and thought that it was somebody playing a prank, but I was the only one in there. And I kind of wanted to run, but I was kind of curious what it was. And it actually ended up at a grave. It's quite a large cemetery, and I hadn't really paid attention to this grave, but it has sunk down into the ground about maybe 3.5 feet. And then there were leaves covering it, and there was no headstone. So the sound stopped, and I crawled down inside of it and brushed the leaves aside, and it was indeed Louis Paradise.
Wow.
Grave. And then the gal that did the photography for this book was in there one day, and we tried to go in together, but it wasn't always possible. So she was in there by herself, and she actually saw an apparition of a man that was wearing kind of a plaid shirt and kind of old-fashioned clothing. And she called to him, and he was kind of peeking around a tree. Wow. And then he and she's a good Mormon, so she's not like a ghosty kind of person. And anyway, and he dissolved right in front of her eyes. Wow. So we knew something was up with all of that. And then the third thing I was going to mention about that was there were condominiums built, believe it or not, right overlooking the cemetery, just a little fence separating it. So when they would go upstairs, the residents would look out on this old, broken down cemetery. And then this one lady came out one day when we were in there working, and she asked what we were doing, and we explained, and she said, well, I hope you know this is a haunted cemetery. Well, we kind of figured that out. And she said that the ghosts, we're talking, these things were 5 feet away from the fence. It was ridiculous. But she said that the ghosts actually came into the condos, and the people were really upset about that after spending a lot of money on these condos. So she's the one that suggested that I write the ghost stories about Park City. So I'll save it there and let the other gals talk. Okay. Tell you some more.
Wow.
Great.
Lengths we go to do our research.
I know. Determined.
It kind of reminds me, I love Pioneer Cemeteries. It reminds me of the time we were at Bodie. My son was like 8 or 9 or something, and we were talking about, it's a ghost town now. And we looked around the cemetery, and he said, well, if it's a ghost town and everybody left, then who buried the last guy?
By the way, we happen to have a park aide who worked at Bodie on the call. So yeah, she knows all about the ghost stories.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, that's Sarah Stifler. She's probably hiding and doesn't know.
Yeah, interesting. Xina, tell us a little bit more about the skinwalkers.
Oh, sure. Well, the idea of shapeshifting is, it's in many different cultures, but I'm of course talking about the Navajo belief system. And in that, there's a shaman or a medicine man or medicine woman. Usually it's a medicine man. They would put on the pelt of an animal, like a coyote, a wolf, a bear, just various animals. And through rites and different, I don't want to say spells, but magical objects and whatnot, they would transform into a shapeshifter and fly around the land. And even it was said that they would be able to eavesdrop on the cavalry soldiers that were there, and they would be able to hear the plans that they had. But so that person, that shapeshifter, is not evil. However, if they want, more power, and they're willing to go to some evil lengths, which include killing a close family member, usually a sibling, then that would kind of open the door to this really evil side and give this person a lot more power. And they would do things like curse people and control their thoughts. They would prowl around in forbidden places like where the dead were buried. In Navajo belief, you don't have anything to do with that, but they would take, little pieces of hair, little hanks of hair, little, clippings of fingernails and things like that had to do with a dead person. And so they're basically a skinwalker then, which is a super evil person that can transform into an animal and wreak all kinds of havoc. And if you lose yourself in certain corners of the internet, you can see people even today talking about their various experiences with skinwalkers. And I'll just tell you a typical way this goes down in the stories. And if you've never been to the Navajo Nation, most of it's in northern Arizona. It's vast. It's very remote out there. There's, not hardly any, a town. It's mostly just people, living on little streets in their traditional, sometimes in their traditional dwelling place, which is a hogan. It's very empty. There's, canyons and red desert earth and all that out there. It's quite beautiful, but also it can be pretty eerie. So the typical story is that, you're driving along at night through the reservation. It's a lonely highway. There's nobody around. And as you're driving, you look over and you see this creature standing by the side of the road, covered with fur, but upright, like a person walks. And as you look at this person, they're just wrong in a lot of ways. They have like kind of a deformed looking face and strange proportions, like for instance, the elbow, instead of bending the way, ours does, it would bend backward, and just really creepy looking. So of course you're driving your vehicle and you hit the gas. Well, it starts following you, and it can run fast enough to keep up with you. Totally terrifying, I'm sure. So you drive to your home real fast and somehow get out of the car and into your house. Well, the skinwalker is not going to leave you alone. So he beat on the doors and the windows, the walls. They call your name, trying to lure you outside to do God knows what to you. And so if you're the hero of the story, you have a shotgun or a rifle or something that has blessed bullets. So you run out there and shoot at the skinwalker. You think you got it, but it runs off. Well, then the next morning, you wake up, everything's good, but you find out that your neighbor has died in her home, and fully human, but with a bullet wound. So that's kind of the typical scary tale that people tell about skinwalkers.
I can see where that would make an exciting story.
Mhm.
Yes. Yes, fun research.
Jeri, in Clockwork Gypsy, you rely on Jewish mysticism as the basis of your paranormal happenings. Can you tell us a little about that and how you've adapted the mythology to your story?
Well, first off, my protagonist, magician, he is half Romani and half Jewish. So his father was Jewish, his mother was Romani, and so he has ties to both. But he's in England. Both of those things are not a good thing to be. And he styled himself as an English gentleman and tries to ignore that aspect of his life, except the whole Jewish mysticism thing is very important with Kabbalah, studying that, because his father, when his mother died, his father started to get into it very heavily, into mysticism and summoning demons and sort of crossing the planes there. But one day he said the wrong thing, and he and Leopold, his son, got sucked into Gehenna, into the darkest part of it, Sitra Akra. Gehenna, there's no Jewish hell, but there is an afterlife, and Gehenna is part of it, and it's on many levels, just like sort of the Divine Comedy. Sitra Akra is the place where all evil comes from and all evil goes. So his father got stuck there, and he was getting stuck there, but the Jewish demon that they always summoned tried to save him. But in order to save his son's life, Leopold's father sacrificed himself to stay and get Leopold out of it. So ever since, and died there. So Leopold was sort of obsessed with studying the mysticism, the Kabbalah, and it's full of symbolism on everything. Colors mean things. Certain magical words mean things. Of course, numbers. So there's all of these things to draw from. It gives Leopold an interesting backstory, but also propels some of the plot that, it's Chekhov's Gehenna, because someday in one of these books, we're going to have to go there because we talk about it a lot. So it's the whole idea of helpful demons and the things that you want to keep there and not come in. And part about summoning demons, why you just don't do it all the time and have all this magic all the time, is because you have to draw blood in order to bring the demon forth. So as the years have gone on and on, Leopold finds he has to cut deeper and deeper, and it's becoming quite a problem. So that's one of the main sort of thrusts of the book, that and all the other things happen around it. There are, of course, I'm into Celtic folklore. So there are goblins and plutocratic goblins, and the fairy realm also gets into it too. And I really like to dig deep into that research and really get to the heart of what people feared about fairies and goblins, and really emphasize that, because my fairies are not wonderful, lovely creatures who are in gossamer and they've got these wings and they're beautiful. They're terrifying. They're more insect-like than, beautiful, child-like. So there's that gets melded in there, and of course Romani folklore as well. So there's all of these aspects coming in, and awfully fun to research. That's where we start with all of this stuff. We say, hey, that's interesting. Let me start reading about that, and then we all go down the rabbit hole, and then we come up with some really great plot points. So yeah.
Thanks. Colleen, you had a comment?
No, I had a question, Jeri.
Question.
You say you had to let blood. Was that his own blood? He had to.
Yeah.
He didn't have. It wasn't vampire type stuff.
No. He just had to cut himself. Just be very, coy about it on stage, turn around and just quickly, cut his arm, things like that. And the demon heals him when he shows up. So.
And then the other thing about the fairies is that in folklore, you only hear about the cute little fairies, but are there stories of little evil fairies flitting around?
Well, all of my fairies are pretty serious. So you find them you need an invitation, and you go to the fairy ring to get into the fairy realm, and then the hijinks happen from there.
Yeah, fairies aren't always depicted as the, Tinkerbell type character.
No, they shouldn't be, because they weren't.
They shouldn't be, right? Exactly.
I mean, if you want to believe.
Yeah, and then at the same time, you're balancing that with the steampunk elements, which is basically Victorian science fiction with steam engines and the dirigible airships and things like that.
It's a neo-Victorian time period.
Right.
But as I say in my afterword, I was more concerned with the history as the foundation first. I wanted to get all that correct. And then, then you can have the steampunk elements, the dirigibles that fly through London, and the raised cars and everything, propelled by steam. Of course, that's the whole idea of steampunk, is that even higher technologies by steam, and sometimes magic. So there's all these things coming into it, and I explained maybe it's not as steampunky as some people want, but I don't see a reason to make a fanciful doorbell to steampunk it up.
Right.
But I'm actually considering I'm making notes for a YA very steampunky series, so that'll fulfill all your dreams, I suppose. Your steampunk.
Spare time, right, Jeri?
Yeah. I'm really a vampire, so I don't need to sleep.
Yeah.
So Jeri brought up an important point. Historical accuracy is important, even when unleashing paranormal characters into the world. So how do you balance the two? Any thoughts on that from Xina?
Oh, sure. Yeah. Research, and then more research. There's, primary sources are always the best. And that's things like personal accounts of beliefs or events that happen, photographs, oral histories, recordings. Luckily, when I'm working in something in the 19th century, there's a lot available. When I do ancient history, that's a little not quite so easy to do.
Trying to get those photographs.
Yeah, exactly. So definitely research in primary sources, which are real accurate, but then secondary sources also, which are talking about the primary, like from a professor or somebody who studies that, and it can look at more of the the overview or the grand ideas or whatnot. But in writing about Navajo beliefs and Navajo experiences, such as the Long Walk, I took a trip up to the cultural center, or the community center up in the Navajo Nation, and they have a little museum there. So I wanted to, see what I could see for my story. And they have one of their whole rooms, and it's a large room, talks about the Long Walk. And the question is, how many of your, or who in your family participated in the Long Walk? And so there were cards of, people's experiences, and they just wallpapered the whole room. So even though this took place in the 1860s, it's very real, it's very raw to the people that are there. So I wanted to make sure that I honored that and respected, the accuracy of the things that happened in my story. So I did a lot of reading of different people's experiences during the Long Walk, and wove some of them into the story. to make it more authentic.
Great. And Colleen, do you want to share with us another one of your experience, or do you have something to say about research here too?
Oh, I always do. I go crazy when I read a historical novel and the history's all wrong. So
Yeah.
no, I really respect people who do what you guys do too.
Well, I know in my werewolf mystery series, it has a voodoo coven, as it were. And I really did want to do a lot of research about that, because this is Haitian voodoo, which is different from other places in Africa, West Africa, and other places. So that, you know, you want to make sure that your source is legitimate and that you're getting all the info in there. And, you know, I don't want to info dump, but I do want to incorporate it and make it interesting to the reader to know that this is what's happening. And then you can kind of take off from there with more of the magic and make it, you know, part of the mystery and part of the spookiness. But, you know, respect where it comes from. You don't want to insult people who are practicing this and, you know, who know better. So,
Yeah.
you know, do your research and make sure that what you present is correct.
Yeah. I was told that we were in New Orleans, and it was about this time of the year, and the Voodoo Museum there. I don't know if you've been there, but
I have been there.
yeah. And I had a conversation with the woman who was there running the place that day, and you know, she was saying, if you're a writer, please respect. You know, and don't go from what you see in movies and things like that, because
that's the worst.
it's the
That's the worst,
craziest. Yeah. So you have to be really careful. I'm sure you were very careful, Jeri.
Yeah, I remember watching old movies. I mean, really old ones, the ones that were made back like in the 30s and 40s and 50s. And there was one I was watching, and I as a child, I had enjoyed it. And then as an adult, I'm like, oh my God, did no one look at a map? Did no one check out the dates these people were born? Because it doesn't make sense.
Oh, right. Yeah.
I don't think they did any kind of research
Born
in
a Devil,
holidays.
one of those Born a Devil, one was terrible. Let's just throw everything at this voodoo thing, call it whatever we want.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Everyone. Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
I think I've run through my questions already. I'm
I
Colleen.
can tell a ghost story though.
Yeah, please do tell me
Okay.
the ghost story.
You
Okay.
get the
Back to Park
flashlight,
City.
Colleen. Get the flashlight.
Yeah. Well, what I did, okay. So we made multiple trips up there and interviewed people. As I was going through the primary sources and so forth, I kept finding references to ghosts. And this was in the old newspapers from, you know, early 1900s. And we would just, every so often they would talk about, well, you know, the Joneses had another visit from the ghost last night, dressed like a miner, blah, blah, blah. So, you know, I started collecting those. And then there were people in town that had been there a very long time too, and interviewed them. But one of my visits, everyone was talking about the Egyptian theater up there. And that's where Robert Redford has his Sundance Festival, you know, the film festival and so forth. I never really connected it with being a very haunted place, but apparently it is. And so I asked permission from the people at the theater to have a ghost hunt there. And the Utah Ghost Hunters came in with all that equipment that you see on television. And they handed me the key literally, and in we went about 11 o'clock at night. And I had contacted the local newspaper too, and a reporter came, because I wanted it to be, you know, something that it just wasn't our word. I wanted, you know, an impartial judge.
So, a witness.
So there were about 20 of us, I think, all together, and we divided into groups, and there were all kinds of things that happened. And the people that I had interviewed before this that worked at the theater, and some of them had retired, talked about different areas where there were ghosts. They knew that there were ghosts that would tap them on the shoulder. And in some cases, there was several cases, there was a ghost in that there were stairs going down into the dressing rooms underneath the stage, and people would be shoved and literally fall down the stairs there. So they didn't know if it was malevolent or if it was a prankster ghost or what. But I mean, these people really believed that stuff too. So anyway, and after the end of the night, so did all of us. But yeah, they had things like the gal that was with the newspaper. I was just reading it again, and she was with the group that went into where they had some of the props, and they were up on shelves. And she wrote that, and I'd heard this, of course, at night from some of them too. This basket of flowers was on a top shelf, and that it lifted. And she said, ordinarily, if a basket of flowers fell down, you wouldn't think twice about it. Oh, well, whatever. But it hovered in the air, and then it went over and hovered over them, and then it crashed down. And so she thought, okay. And then they had, of course, the ghost hunter people had their tape recorders going and all of that equipment going. And one of the questions asked was, do you have a name? And you can hear when they played it back that night in a very deep growly sound. It was Seth was his name. So, and then there was another incident. I'm trying to remember how, there were so many, I'm trying to make this short, but there was a ghost down in the basement where they had the bigger pieces of props and things like that. And there was supposedly a ghost that used the wheelchair, that sat in the wheelchair. And they figured out kind of, he must have been this or that, and, you know, so they didn't think too much about that. But then there was a younger ghost, and the name that came through on the tape recorder was, as I recall, it was Johnny. It was Jimmy or Johnny, but I think it was Johnny. And, you know, when they asked what his name was. So they said that there was also a ghost up in the projection room. And so what happened was, just to jump ahead, the next day, I had invited a psychic. The local psychic was supposed to be pretty good. I said, would you like to come? I didn't want her on the theater ghost hunt, but she came in with me the next day. And the first thing she said when she walked into the basement area with props was, oh, there's someone here and his name is Johnny. And I kind of went, look, you know, okay. And then she went on and she told me his story. And she said he was a projectionist. It was back around the turn of the century of like early 1900s. And he was killed in the mines, even though he was a projectionist. There was an explosion in the mines. And I knew that from my research that a lot of men had been killed. But what was he doing in there? And she said, well, he says that they sound that siren when there's an explosion or a cave-in, and everyone ran up there. And so he was, I think, 17, and he went down in the basket to help rescue some of the trapped men, and along with others. And then he came up, and they said, don't go down there again because the gases are too thick now. Well, his brother was still down there. So he went back down, tried to get his brother, and they found him. He made it back to the basket with some other guys, and they all died, and they brought him up. So that's what the ghost, he said he wanted to be a projectionist because they were bringing in the silent movies and all of that. And he loved the theater. And so that's where he wanted to be. But it was so weird because, to hear it, there's somebody here and there's somebody in a projection room that they feel a lot, taps them on shoulders, moves things around, and then this psychic comes in and verifies it. And it's like, oh, okay.
Wow.
Anyway, there were so many of those kind of stories about orbs, and somebody actually saw a part of a ghost on the stairs, and curtains moving, and just all these weird things going on. So if you ever have a chance to do a ghost hunt, you might want to do it. They're very interesting. So,
Yeah, that sounds like it's got some ideas for a story there, maybe.
there you go. Oh, and the lady in blue on the stage all the time. So
the most haunted house in San Diego, the Whaley House.
yeah.
I never got to see anything happening there.
Oh, no.
I know, what a bummer.
I
Yeah.
think it's because there's so many tourists that come in. I keep going down and wondering too, but I think that after hours is the best time
The
when it's
better one.
quiet.
But it's interesting because downtown San Diego, there, the old town San Diego, there's still graves under the street. They finally marked them, so you can see the little metal discs where they've marked them, because they, you know, corruption in government. Who would have thought? That said, oh yeah, we moved everybody, but no, they didn't.
Oh my gosh.
Oh, you know, speaking of that, when I was doing my research, I found, again, I talked about the 2 cemeteries. And then if you ever go to Park City, you go through Snyderville when you get off the highway first, and it was a sawmill town, just a little town. And then the guys that died in the sawmill explosion, and then their families and all that, were buried in a smaller cemetery, kind of on a hillside. So I went back up there, you know, we walked around those and recorded some of the names and everything. Went back up there a few years later, and they built houses over the graves.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
Didn't they learn from
move
Poltergeist?
I know. I was just saying.
Didn't they learn from Poltergeist? Yes.
No.
Oh,
Yeah.
Goodness.
Imagine if they have any ghosts. I would think they would.
boy.
Goodness.
So are there any questions for any of us?
Mhm.
Let's see if there's any questions in the chat room. Just some nice comments.
Yeah, those are great.
So I have a question for Jeri. When I was doing my witch story and then with my medieval fantasy, I had occasion to do some rhyming spells, which were really fun to write. And I just wondered if you do any of that with your in, like, say, Book of the Hidden, or
In the Book of the Hidden, I do, and most of those spells are from something I looked up, so I didn't have to make them up. I wanted it to sound, you know, more authentic, I guess. So yeah, those are made up. Those are from sources, and I use a little Raelian too from Mr. Lovecraft, H.P. Lovecraft. So because he said, go ahead, anybody can use stuff out of my, you know, my life, my
his world?
that I've written about. So yeah, but yeah, there was, because there are Wiccans in that book, I wanted to make sure that that was as authentic as it could be. So I looked up a lot of some of the oldest things that I could. I mean, you can't really find anything druidic because those people were long gone and they didn't write anything down. So,
Nope.
but yeah, so it's very interesting. All of the little bits you can find, especially all you writers out there or readers. You know, if you ever want to research things, don't leave out the footnotes, because the footnotes have some of the most interesting things in them.
That's true. Yes.
And they will lead you on to other research. But also interesting little tales in those as well. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's the thing about research. You get started and you never know when it's going to end. You're going down the
I
rabbit
know,
hole, and it's a while till you come back up.
Because you just don't know when to stop.
Yeah. Yeah. It can be a good way to procrastinate. So you have to have some self-control, which is tough. Yeah.
Yeah. So how do you know when you've done enough research, or do you just say, okay, that's enough, I've got to stop?
When you look at the calendar and your book is
Right, exactly.
gonna get writing.
I would like to know how Jeri keeps track of all of the stuff that you find. That must be interesting.
I have. Let me look at this. Is the Crispin one for the last Crispin book. But I have notebooks for each book. So it's got all these wonderful little tabs.
Oh, neat.
All the research that I've gotten, and I always reference where I got that research, and other little bits of information, like what characters look like, because I will forget, and it's sort of a diary as well that I can argue with myself. Is this a good road we're going down, or should we turn around and go back? I mean, or where are we now in the story, Jeri? Conclude something. Yeah.
Wow, you're a lot more organized than I am.
I mean, there are people that do those little cards on the wall,
Yeah.
with yarn and this and that. I can't do that.
Yeah, yeah. Well,
Well, do you have any more stories, Colleen?
Oh, back to the, well, no. Oh,
No?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah. Okay, yes, I do. Yes, I do.
Okay.
Okay, so actually, a couple of them. Again, doing the research away, not the Egyptian, but there's a hotel up there. There are quite a few haunted buildings up there. And so we did a lot, dragged my girlfriend along that did the photography. And so one of the buildings that was supposed to be haunted was a hotel that had been there during the mining era and so forth. So there had been a double homicide there. And it was a woman and her lover, and they were at the hotel, and her husband came and he found out they were there, and he came in and he shot them in the bed. So we just decided we were going to go over there and ask to see the room and see what happened. And so the gal that was the manager said, well, people slept in there last night, but the bed hasn't been made, but if you're sure you want to go in, or we could make the bed. No, it's not necessary. We just want to go and see if there are any cold spots. We were feeling pretty confident after the Egyptian experience. So, and she brought her camera and everything. So we were going in there, and the manager was in there with us, and she started to talk about, well, she said the names of the people who've been shot and that kind of thing. And as we're standing there listening to her, the crumpled bed, the covers were pulled in the back where someone had gotten out, and they lifted up and they pulled up, and someone straightened the bed.
I want that ghost.
yeah.
You're one there that does laundry.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, we thought that was pretty incredible. And so she says, well, that's whatever the name was of this ghost, this jealous husband. So she says, you need to go over across the street, because after he shot them, he ran over down the street and went to whatever the name of the saloon was then. And somebody figured out it was him, and they came and got him. So they had a shootout at the saloon. It ended up in the street, and he was shot and killed. Okay, so but what there was then, when we were there, it was a pizza parlor. So we decided we would, go in there, but we didn't want to go in with questions during the lunch hour or anything like that. So there was hardly anybody in there when we decided to go in. And it was a small, it'd been a saloon. And so this grumpy woman says something like, can I help you? And we told her what we wanted. I said, we've been interviewing people about, ghost activity, and supposedly, this has been several other businesses, and they've all had ghost problems, and everybody thinks it's whatever his name was that killed his wife and lover. And she says, get out, just get out.
Oh dear.
Oh, what's going on? And she says, I don't believe in that. That's satanic, and I don't want to even talk about it. And I said, well, we're not here to cause any problems or anything like that. And she says, well, I don't want to talk about it. If you even mention this in your book, I'm just going to sue you. So,
Whoa.
And about that time, and we're like over here, and the little tables, had bentwood chairs. About that time, as she said that, one of the chairs scooted out, lifted up, and flopped over on its side. And we said, okay, we're leaving.
Bye.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah,
Great
I
story.
mean, like I say, we had some really weird experiences up there.
Sounds like. Okay, we do have some questions here. Avis Crane asked, is there anything that any of you found too scary to use in a story?
Well, I could speak to that a little bit. In doing the research on the long walk, there were a lot of really terribly sad stories. And while they weren't really too scary, I felt like they were, just the weight of them and what happened later on to the Navajo people it was just a bit too dark. So, you know, somewhat, some of that is okay, but, you know, didn't want to make it really, really dark. One of the good things in writing about the Navajo people and the Long Walk is that eventually they had been, the government forced them to eastern New Mexico because they had been harassing settlers and things like that. So that was the punishment according to the government. And also they wanted them to farm in that area and said, oh, it's wonderful farmland and all that. Well, it really was not wonderful farmland. It was horrible. And they didn't have enough food for people. They would give them flour and they didn't use flour, so they didn't know what to do with it. They would just like make a little paste out of it, and there must have been microbes and stuff in there because they would get terribly ill eating that. So anyhow, eventually they were offered a choice. You can go on to Oklahoma and live there, or you can go back to your homeland. And of course, they chose to go back to their homeland. And today, you know, they have a very large reservation and also, you know, pretty large population when compared to other peoples. So there's a little glimmer of hope in there, which is, you know, refreshing.
Anyone else about Too Scary?
If anything was too scary, I mean, there's all kinds of mythical monsters out there and creatures that do kind of icky stuff. But no, I mean, in the whole levels of Gehenna, there's the same thing as I said, the Divine Comedy, where different levels are for different crimes or whatever. But in Jewish mythology, there's not eternal punishment for a finite life, which I think is fair. You know, you can only live so long, so why should you suffer more than that? But maybe I disagree with that. With all the stuff that we're living through today, maybe we'd like some people to have a little more eternal than everybody else.
I did run into a little of that, but not, you know, with this book, obviously, but when I did the last novel where people died on the Lusitania, and some of the stuff I read, you know, the nonfiction stuff was way, way too horrible to put in my novel. I didn't want to make people.
And like the Donner Party and things like that is horrific.
Yeah.
We mostly
Yeah. I taught about the Donner Party in a California history class and showed a little film on it. And on the way out of the classroom, one girl said, "That was worse than a horror movie." Yeah.
Wow.
Especially since it was
Real
true.
life.
Yeah.
Yeah, real life. Okay. There's a question for Colleen. Are you thinking about or planning on writing any similar books of New Orleans plantation homes? There are quite a few that are said to be haunted and have paranormal history.
I was going to, I may still write a story, a time travel set in New Orleans and in some of the plantations. So I might be able to incorporate some of that into it. But no, I think that's probably been done. I'm guessing. I love New Orleans and I love that area.
Right there. And there's so much. I mean, no wonder a lot of writers like to write about it, because there's so much there. You can kind of feel it, the paranormal, just sort of shimmering on the surface.
Yeah.
But you can move that out of the way and then have a really good dinner.
Right.
And New Orleans is just a great city. It's so much fun.
Linda, is there anything about your pirate and witch story that you want to share?
Oh,
Different.
yeah, it was part of a group, and we all had to write a book about this mythical island. And so I came up with the idea of being left marooned on a deserted island. And so my witch is traveling back to Jamaica from Britain, and she had gotten married over there, but the husband, she overhears the husband and his mistress plotting to kill her.
Oh.
She performs a banishing spell to make them go away. Well, the next thing you know, they've been captured by pirates. The husband is dead. And she dresses as a boy to join the crew, but then she gets caught pretty quick by the captain. And anyway, it was meant to be more of a really spicy and mildly erotic story, but the paranormal elements made it a whole lot of fun. And they did write her banishing spell. And then in the author's note, I say, don't try this at home.
Yeah.
You know what's really funny about that though? In researching Victorian magicians and the acts, because there were a lot of acts on the show. There was the magician, if he were the main thrust, he'd be first, and then there'd be these other acts like dog acts. But there was also always a little playlet. And there was one with a witch and a pirate.
Not a typical
There was
pairing.
the sorcerer and somebody else and the sailor, and but I mean, they're just these little short little one acts, to titillate and to thrill. It's funny.
Tapped into something, Linda.
Yeah, that is funny. Witch and pirate don't usually go together.
They usually don't, but here they go.
My niece is really into pirates.
Hmm.
She has her whole room decorated. She calls it Pirate's Den. And it's all decorated with
Here you go.
pictures and signs and
In the
stuff.
morning.
Yeah.
Okay,
Pirates are
well-
fun back in the, oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just gonna say we are at 7:30, so we can do a little bit more pirate talk. If anyone wants to stick around, I'm here for that. But I did want to just say thank you to everybody who came, and this will be put on the library's YouTube page if you missed some of the beginning, or I guess if you missed some of the end, you're not here right now. So just as a reminder, the next history talk is going to be, let's see, Monday, November 16th, which is a Monday. You can find information about that. Fact versus fiction. You can find information about that on the library's calendar, which I'll put in the chat right now. And we do also have more cool upcoming events. If you're interested in other history, we're going to be having a presentation on the history of wheat in Latin America in a couple weeks. So that and more. Anyways, thank you. And again, if we want to talk about pirates a teeny bit more, I will leave us here.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank
Yeah.
you.
Thank
for
you.
coming.
That was
Thanks
fun.
for coming.
Bye.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye.